one of our two international guests here this year with us. Our upcoming guest is known for his work on Silver Surfer, Green Lantern, Witchblade, amongst a few to name, and we'll have him on stage shortly to come here and talk about his extensive career. But first I want to introduce our interviewer who's going to be sitting down with Ron Marz. Let's have on stage the Indian artist behind many resplendent works, including the recent Spider-Man India. Please welcome Tadam Gyadu. All right, Tadam Gyadu. Good to have you here, man.
Same here.
Yeah. So, of course, you are a panel on your own. So, if one were to sit down with you and interview you, it'll be a long interview with all the work that you've done recently. But today, you're taking over my role. I'm glad for that. Thank you. And you're going to be interviewing Ron Marz. What are you looking forward to talk with this man?
I think I'm looking forward to geeking out.
Geeking out?
Yeah. So I love Ron's work, and so there is so much that I want to talk to him about, and I'm very excited.
So I will not eat into that very precious interview time. Bangalore, get ready to put your hands together for our guest all the way from New York City, Ron Marz. Hello and welcome to Bangalore.
Thank you.
All right, over to you, Tadam.
So you get to go take lunch now?
Yeah, thank you.
Ron, for joining us in Bangalore Comic Con, and we are really happy to have you here. And and also like I'm super glad that you are sitting down here with us to talk about comics in general and your work. So yeah, thank you so much. First of all.
Thank you for having me. Thank you to Comic Con India for bringing me. Thank you to you guys for actually showing up to listen to this. It's much appreciated. I know that, oh my God, some of you are even standing. This is insane. Everybody's good? Everybody's dry? Excellent. Again, seriously, appreciate you coming out, and we'll try not to bore you.
So Ron, we know that you have worked on so many comic book projects. You are known for co-creating Kyle Rayner, the Green Lantern for DC Comics, and you have worked on so many crossover stories that between Marvel and DC, which is not very easy to do, and that is something that you pulled off. Could you tell us, like, growing up, what was your inspiration? When was the first time you read a comic book?
When I was tiny, like this tiny little dude in the first row, like his size. I think before I could actually read, I discovered a box of my older brother's old Marvel comics in the basement. And like if I had that stuff now, I wouldn't have to work because it'd be worth like millions. But it was all old beat up Marvel comics, and I loved the pictures, I loved the stories because I could follow the stories just from looking at the pictures, but I couldn't read them as a kid. Like I wasn't even in kindergarten yet. So I think those are the first comics I ever saw, and it stuck with me. A lot of times it's the stuff that you discover at that very young age that imprints itself upon you. And I read comics once I learned to read. I read comics up until I was, 11, 12 years old. And then, of course I outgrew comics because when you're a teenager, you discover other things to do. Some of which we will not discuss here since there's little guys present. And I didn't look at comics for a number of years until I was a senior in high school. So like 17 years old. And sort of rediscovered them, just seeing them on a spinner rack. You guys have spinner racks, I assume, in newsstands. Just seeing Marvel Comics from that age, I got sucked right back in, and really like 5 years later, I was writing. So I got to be immersed in comics again for my late teen years and early 20s, and by like 22 I was working for Marvel.
Wow, that is quite a journey. So Ron, could you like take us behind the stage of your writing? You know, how do you come up with ideas, and what is your writing process like?
That's the truth of it. Is like a lot of people have asked me at the booth today, like where do you get your ideas and how do you do this? And I don't really have an answer for it because I've just always been able to do it. Like I was from a young age, I was making up stories in my head, and usually imitative stuff. Like I would read Tarzan books and John Carter of Marz books and comics and watch Star Trek and Star Wars. So I had those stories in my head. I would make up stories from those. But it was just something that my imagination was always working. And I read a lot as a kid, not just comics, but J.R.R. Tolkien, Robert T. Howard, Edgar Rice Burroughs, fantasy books and science fiction books, and all of that whole genre of material from a young age, from like elementary school. And I really I fell in love with writing, and I fell in love with telling stories because I was immersed in all that stuff. So like where the stories come from, I don't really have any idea. They just come, and we say we don't look the gift horse in the mouth. Like you don't ask where it comes from. The universe just kind of delivers it to you when you need it. So far that's worked out. So far, of course there are times when you go, I don't have any idea what the next story is. And you need to recharge your batteries. And you need to sort of feed the machine. Like any engine, it needs fuel. So that fuel is reading and watching movies and television and just sort of immersing yourself in stories again, and it tops off your tank and off you go.
Wow, that's so cool. So Ron, there's this Indian writer. His name is Mr. Ram V.
Because the thing that was in my head, you made real. And that's still the part of the equation, even after doing this for 30 years, that is irreplaceable. There's no amount of money that you can put on that feeling when the thing that was just a germ in your head is now made real. It's the coolest thing ever. And I think it's a big part of why I'm still doing this, is because you chase the intoxication of that creation, of that sorcery. I think it's the hardest kind of writing you can do, because you have to have mastered so many skills to write comics well. Just like you've had to master so many skills to draw comics well, you have to be able to draw everything. Not just superheroes fighting, not just, space armadas blowing each other up, but two people sitting on a bench talking, or a bird landing on a branch. That's hard. That's to me, you guys are the special forces of art, because you have to draw everything. You have to draw it relatively quickly. Writing comics is, I guess, the special forces of writing, because we have to have so many different skills. When you write a screenplay, like I've written screenplays, and they're easy. You're just worried about generally the dialogue and the overall flow of the story, and the visual direction and how the story unfolds. That's the director's job. That's somebody else's affair, and they don't expect you to, they don't want you to put your thumbprint on that. For comics, writing a script, you have to, you the writer and you the artist have to collaborate to make all of that. When we do a comic together, we're the writer and director and cinematographer and editor and lighting master and costume department, and we do everything. Just two dudes in a room have to create that whole world. So I think it's different every time you work with a different artist, is you figure out, all right, what does the artist need me to give them for them to draw the best story that they can draw. So it's, you have to be able to think in pictures, you have to be able to break down the movie that's playing in your head to the page, right? And there's a lot of technical skills with that, but I think the biggest one is there's one action per panel, The pictures don't move. A lot of people don't get that. More than anything, it's how you pace your story out onto those 20 pages that you have. And part of my job is to make sure you get something cool to draw. Like two people sitting at a table for 20 pages, you're gonna come kill me. And you probably should. So part of my job is to make sure that you're excited every time you sit down at the drawing board. So you have to think visually as a writer. You have to put yourself in the artist's shoes and go, what's going to be exciting for the artist to put on the page, and therefore what's going to be exciting for the reader to look at on the page. So, you know, there's a large array of skills that you have to do this in the building now, and it's just like, this feels almost like a second home to me because I've been able to do so many projects here, both comics and some TV stuff. And it's a constant learning experience for me because the culture is so rich, the mythology is so rich, that I always feel like I'm learning as I'm going. And we should always, all of us should always be learning, but to sort of be able to learn about the tradition, the kind of storytelling that has been here for thousands of years, to play with those toys, you know, to play with the mythology toys that everybody here grows up with. It's an amazing opportunity. Plus, it's really creatively satisfying to work with great artists, and someday with you, and to be able to kind of put your stamp on things that would have never occurred to you. You know, because you get into comics and you want to write Spider-Man and Superman, which is cool, and you know, that's a great experience and it's the best job in the world, but that's not all there is to doing comics. And being able to work on stuff here, work on mythology stuff, bring Indian artists into the American market. It's, again, we're all of the same tribe. We have different backgrounds, we have different cultures, but we all love the same thing. To me, that's a really powerful opportunity to, you know, build bridges and to leave a lasting story behind.
So, you know, right now I should admit that, you know, I'm currently geeking out because also, you know, I'm super excited and kind of nervous that I'm talking to you right now, because I remember the very first time that I read your name in a comic book was in Avion 9, the first issue of Avion 9, and I was in high school back then. And I'm not saying this to make you feel old or anything. I'm just saying this to tell you that, you know, how impactful your work was. And from that day and today, you know, sitting here and talking to you, it's just kind of, you know, something really, I think, inspiring for me. Yeah, to keep working hard and.
Well, but that's how this works, right? Like we all we look at the generation that came before us, and we're inspired by that, and hopefully, like, the generation that was before us reaches back to us and pulls us into the story. And I think it taught me a lot about humanizing events and humanizing stories, because that's essentially what fiction stories are. It's like we are putting you in someone's shoes. We are putting you in someone's life, even if it's a silver alien in the Marvel Universe. It's still a story about a person, and we want you to identify with that person and feel like you need to know what happens to that person next. So the journalism experience, even though it was, you know, just probably 3-4 years total, was really invaluable, and I still rely on a lot of that stuff now. I think if you want to write comics, doing some journalism is not the worst way to start.
That's a very insightful answer, Ron. Thank you. Also, Ron, you have been writing comics for over 3 decades now, right? And you have obviously seen a lot of ups and downs in the industry. So I wanted to ask you, what changes do you see back when you were like starting out as a writer, and what kind of difference is there now in the current comic book scene?
Well, the biggest change is I didn't get flown to India to be at conventions when I started my career. I just think overall the biggest change is that comic culture, what was just a very niche, like when I was a kid, you didn't read comics on the school bus or anything like that because the other kids made fun of you. It was sort of a secret thing that you did with maybe a couple other friends, but it was not common. It was not, it was not this by any means. I think the biggest difference is that our comic culture, thanks to television to a certain extent, but movies very much so, is now worldwide culture. The rest of the world has caught up with the kind of stories that we were telling in comics for decades, right? We were telling the sort of stories that you could only get on that page because there was no credible way to present that on a movie screen. Now we can tell any kind of story in a movie because we can show that. We can show some are instant, some are just, the whole thing just presents itself to you. But more often than not, you just let it simmer, it's like a pot on a stove, and eventually the soup is just right, and that's when that story is ready to be born.
Wow, that is quite insightful. I think for all the aspiring writers, that should be very helpful. So, Ron, you did not have any formal training for writing in particular?
I graduated from college with a communications degree, but that was mostly like for journalism, and I worked on the high school newspaper, and I was the editor of the college newspaper. So I was always writing. I mean, I was like, if you didn't want to do your book report in high school, you could pay me to do it, and I would write your book report. It'd be really good. Like, you'd get an A on it. So I guess that was my first professional writing, is like ghosting book reports for other kids. But so I'd always been writing, and it never occurred to me to be anything else. That was just what I could do. I knew I was good at it, and I knew I liked doing it. So the training was, yes, I did some in college, and then I eventually went to, graduated from college like at 21, and worked at a daily newspaper for a few years. And that was actually great training, like figuring out how to write for a newspaper, which is taking a finite amount of information for your story. And I started off as a sports writer, covering high school, college, professionals, and then eventually became the editorial director for the entertainment section, and wrote movie reviews and all that kind of stuff. But all of the training there was taking a certain amount of information and fitting it into a certain space, and taking a series of bullet points, a series of facts, and turning it into a narrative. And I didn't realize it at the time, but that was a huge benefit for me to move into comics, because comics are, in a lot of ways, the same thing. You have a finite amount of space, like in a monthly Marvel or DC comic, it's 20 pages now. So you have to fit your story into 20 pages. You don't go to your editor and say, oh, well, this one's gonna be 25 pages because I just couldn't, they don't, that's it. You get 20 and you figure out how to make that happen. So being a journalist taught me how to write. They see their story pages, they come back and say, oh my God, that's the coolest thing ever. I'm gonna do this for the rest of my life.
Wow, I'm sure, Ron, that it was your description of how you come up with ideas, and how you started working in comics, and your process, and the characters you have created, and the insightful talk we have just had right now will leave a lasting impact on the audience, and it has already left a imprint on me for sure. So with that, I think I would like to thank you so much, Ron, for this talk and coming down to Bangalore Comic Con. It's been such a pleasure, and I'm sure for the audience as well, it was very insightful to listen to you. Thank you so much, Ron. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You're great at this. Thank you for coming, guys. Really appreciate all of you.
Thank you so much for coming down, guys.
That was great.
All right, Bangalore, let's hear it once again for Tadam Gyadu and Marz.